Welcome to r/MaliciousCompliance, where we share stories of people conforming to the letter but not the spirit of a request. But before the video starts, please make the red subscribe button gray. And here we go. Today's first story is, Made my boss who barely worked get reprimanded and fired by the director. So this story takes place about 3 years ago, when I was doing an internship alongside two of my friends from the same class. Not a native English speaker, also on phone, so expect mistakes. So to give some basic details, me and my two friends got an internship at a large school under their IT department. Fix IT-related problems all over the school, and fix problems for students, teachers, guests, etc. Now the job was okay, nothing to write home about, and the pay was $5 a day to make up for gas expenditures. So imagine working from 8 to 5, often having to finish up, stretching that from 8 to 6, for $25 a week for 4 months. So essentially slave labor, in exchange for fulfilling a school requirement. So when we started, we met our boss in our shared office. We'll call him Ron. He seemed alright, but not much of a talker. Someone you could tell a joke and he'd stare at you, not sure to react. So the first week went alright. He was supposed to have us tag along and show us the ropes, but he more or less just sent us out to SH. Pretty crappy to do to a bunch of barely adult lads, just starting their education. But regardless, we made it work. I more or less did Ron's job and told my friends what to do and how to do it, splitting up the jobs, saying who did what, etc. Ron's initial inaction became worse though. When he entered, he took a long coffee break 5 minutes after entering, usually from 20 minutes to an hour, despite there being a coffee machine right outside our office. He would come back to do close to nothing, and take his lunch break at 11, ranging from 2 to 4 hours, and when he came back, he would take at least 2 more coffee breaks. To boil it down, on a good day he would work 5 to 6 hours of his 9-hour contract, on a bad day maybe 3 to 4. After about 3 months of this, we were all tired of this BS. We worked 4 extra hours on an average week, didn't learn SH, and barely had time for our own lunch breaks, which we usually ended up taking a quick bite in between phone calls or job. So I started following the exact details of the contract instead. Several smoke breaks, 1-hour lunch break, etc., and got permission from the boss to take our breaks together since we didn't have time to meet any coworkers. As such, it'd be uncomfortable to take lunch breaks alone. It's worth noting Ron drove home during his lunch breaks, hence them being so long, and he was the main contact if the office phones were not answered. But he rarely answered his phone, it was usually off. So whenever Ron went on his break, we waited exactly 1 hour, his lunchtime, before going on our own break, and then we extended our break to 2 hours, usually arriving back at the office room before Ron had come back. Well, we carried this on for several weeks. Every time work had piled up, there were people waiting in front of the office. The phones had a dozen missed calls. Well, one day we were on our break, and Ron calls saying his work phone was full of missed calls, obviously panicking, telling us to go to the office. Well, I politely inform him that I just started my break, and he's supposed to be at the office himself, given his lunch break is long over. Right, Ron? Before saying that I'd see him in 50 minutes when our break is over. So we get back there and find the director talking loudly at him, and him deflecting, saying there must have been a schedule mix-up, etc. Well, we think it ended there. Ron observes the rules for a few days, before falling into his old behavior, and at that point our time is up. We say our goodbyes and go to the director to get our internship results. So he says we all did great, and he heard good things about us, but our attendance had not been good for the past 3 weeks, so he couldn't give us a full grade. So at that point, I stop him and tell him the entire story about Ron and his breaks, and that we followed the rules to the letter. I also show him our work schedule, which is filled in and shows we were not skipping much of anything. Well, he pretty much flips his SH and basically thanks us for keeping the entire IT operation running, and that he'll have a word with Ron, and that he will change our grades back. After that, I didn't hear anything, so I decided to message an ex-coworker from the internship to see what happened. Apparently, Ron got berated, told to fix his act, slipped back into his behavior, and got fired. The second story is, Shame me with lunch detention? Joke's on you, I'll sit here forever. Had forgotten about this story until the other day, when I was chatting with a friend I went to high school with. It's silly, but I think it fits. It was the late 90s. I was still wearing too much flannel and continuing my historical trend of keeping books from the library much too long. I had a paper due for my sophomore global studies class, so I naturally took out more books than I could read, wrote the essay, and completely forgot about the books piled in the corner of my bedroom. After a series of overdue slips into my homeroom, I eventually did return the 4 or 5 books one sunny afternoon in the anonymous drop book during a study period. Promptly moved on to bigger and better things. About 2 weeks later, I was called down to the assistant principal's office, in that space of time before classes officially started that was reserved for one thing and one thing only. The reprobates and delinquents were in trouble. I walked the halls thinking that surely this was just a timing mishap, and I was being summoned to receive congratulations. For some kind of award I didn't know I had entered into competition for. Yup, he just wants to prepare me for the surprise ticker tape parade. I was wholly unprepared to hear that I was receiving lunch detention, to start immediately, because I had not returned a single book that I still remember was slim and had a white and red cover from my GS paper research. I tried to argue that there was a mistake, since I was sure, like I am sure that I have fingertips, that I had returned it. But he could not be moved, and I was sentenced to indefinite lunch detention until I either returned the book or paid the $16 to replace it. I left the office, late for first period, defeated, but kept my head held high at lunch later that day as I walked past the entire cafeteria, which held a couple hundred of my peers. Plastic food tray in hand, I went down the hall to the old shop classroom that had since been moved and the awaiting detention. I checked in with Mrs. Brown at her desk in front and took an inconspicuous seat in the back. Staring down at my canned peach slices, I braced for the worst. A murderous ruckus was going to break out any minute, I could tell. But once my ears stopped ringing, I discovered that it was really a calm escape from the crowded and rowdy lunchroom. I ate slowly that day, enjoyed my young thoughts in blissful quiet, and wondered what kind of heaven was this. To be fair, I did search far and wide for the book that first day. Attempts to find it in my locker, bedroom, and backpack were fruitless, and the general consensus in my home was that the school was being ridiculous. I certainly wasn't going to pay for something I didn't lose. So the next day, considering my brief brush with the law and the invisible stain already attached to my reputation, I went armed with a book and my lunch past the maddening crowds to the detention room. I sat there day after day for nearly 2 months of lunches. In retrospect, to this day those remain some of the most relaxing lunch breaks of my life. I had around 40 solid minutes to recharge in mostly complete silence with my reasonably priced lunch and whatever book I was currently reading. I had to recount my origin story a few times, since no one could figure out how the quiet bookworm of a girl who had never been in trouble before had landed in the wilds of detention. But I was mostly left to my own devices in this newly found peaceful retreat. I was friendly with Mrs. Brown, who had worked for the district of my small town since I was in elementary school, and even hooked her up with a sweet horse whisper poster that she loved from my family's mom and pop video store. She must have felt bad for me because somewhere around the 1-month mark, she started up a collection to cover the cost of the book. She added the initial donation, but teachers would stop by to chit-chat and would add loose change to it, and the race to buy my freedom was on. After a few weeks, she handed me just under $7. My love of solitude was no match for the guilt of carrying around that money, or my mom, who had just started a new job in the school district. So with a heavy heart, I paid in full for the missing book and went back to my old lunch table in the thick of the action. Months later, during the last week of school, I was called down to the library at my convenience, and with sweaty palms forced myself to face the music over what was inevitably going to be yet another overdue book at the end of the day. Well, lo and BFing hold, the end-of-year inventory check had located the book as waylaid in the wrong section of the library. I received a few sheepish looks from the librarians as they refunded the money and apologized in a backward way that still made me the bad guy, as overdue books are the real blemish on one's character, so how are they to assume that I didn't lose the book? Remember my mom's new job in the school? Well, she just happened to be walking by the library just as I was finishing up, and to say that she laid into them is far too extreme sounding. But she did scold some stern-faced librarians into giving me a proper apology. She also demanded that they look into reforming their system, and my favorite part, take the proper measures to expunge my record. She was very concerned about me carrying around the albatross of false accusation, apparently. And just like that, my life of crime was over. And the last story is, follow the rules, guess you don't need sleep. A little background, I'm a retired state park supervisor, and this happened a couple of years before I retired. The way the department is organized is that there are 3 divisions: parks, maintenance, and administration. The parks is responsible for the day-to-day operations of a park, maintenance handles major construction and repair projects, the motor pool, equipment maintenance, etc., and administration handles the budgets, hiring, legal, contracts, and so on. The parks in an area are in a group with a group manager, with a maintenance group with its own manager for support. The manager titles fell under administration, so someone with that title could be assigned to either parks or maintenance. So on to the story. Our longtime group manager retired, and we waited to see who the new manager would be. It's never a quick process, bureaucracy in action, but after several months, new guy was appointed as our group manager. He came in from another region, really excited about the promotion, but had never worked at a park, just in maintenance. About a month after he got there, it was time for the spring meeting of our group supervisors and assistant supervisors. This is where he announced that we were going to go by the book from now on. All overtime requests had to be approved by him first, before any overtime was put in. Additionally, work schedule changes, for us and our staffs, had to be approved by him, with at least 1 week's notice. Now technically he was correct. Those are the rules for state employees, and what he was used to. But we had always been more flexible out of practical necessity. One of the things about the park side was that during camping season, we were required to have a supervisor on site 24/7, so we lived on our parks. It wasn't too bad. We had a cabin which doubled as our headquarters, and it saved a lot on travel. The downside was that you had days where you were sleep deprived, since some nights you'd be woken up to take care of some problem. Once the camping season was over, we were generally working from home, at our group headquarters, or helping out the maintenance group with repairs in the parks. Our previous managers had all done some time in the parks, so they knew what it was like. They told us to just take care of whatever issue happened, and then email any incident reports and overtime requests to them the next day. They considered staff scheduling to be our job. Our staffs were seasonal employees, college students, retirees, etc. And in order to accommodate various appointments, family issues, etc., we'd allow them to swap days with each other or make up lost time. As long as staffers worked their 40 hours and the park was staffed, everyone was happy. But that was not going to be allowed any longer. His other policy change was that we were to call him immediately if we had to call in the police, the fire department, forest rangers, game wardens, an ambulance, or directed someone to a clinic for a medical issue. We all tried to talk him out of this, but he wasn't budging. A lot of shared looks, eye rolls, and shrugged shoulders resulted as we all reached the same conclusion. After the meeting, my assistant asked me what I thought, and I said, he's really going to regret this. He has no idea of what he's in for. Once the season started, he found out. Oh boy did he find out. He got phone calls at all hours of the day and night, 7 days a week. Someone woke us up at 1 a.m. with a complaint that we had to go address? Phone call requesting overtime. My kid's sick, where's the nearest clinic? Phone call. Called the police to deal with some drunk idiots? Phone call. Bear in the park? Had the game wardens in? Phone call. Every time we got asked to handle something outside of normal hours or on his list, he got a phone call. He'd asked for it, he got it. With all the calls from every supervisor and assistant in our group, I don't think he got more than 1 or 2 nights of uninterrupted sleep a week, and I heard his wife wasn't happy about the constant calls to their house. To add to his workload, we made sure to send him emails documenting the reasons for each phone call. We sent in forms we'd been told years before weren't required. New guy hadn't requested them, but why should we leave it to chance? He was tied to his desk answering the phone and trying to read the flood of emails, forms, and reports he was getting. We were following his instructions to the letter, and then some. This went on for about 5 weeks, and then we got an email from him. He was resigning as our group manager and going back to his old job in maintenance. It had taken us just a little over a month to break him. I heard he was a lot happier back there, and I hope he learned the truth of the old saying, be careful of what you wish for, you might just get it. Thank you for watching, bye!